Baruch Hashem, today we are learning Maseches Tamid in the source of my father's 10th yahrzeit, this coming Chav Zayin Elul, this Tuesday night, Wednesday. And a big thank you to Rabbi Chaim and Basi Mendelsohn for arranging this amazing program. Today we are going to learn almost to the end of the Masechta. We're going to leave a little bit to be finished at the live Siyum. And we are discussing the rest of the process in the daily Tamid, which we've been discussing throughout this Masechta. So, Parak Vav, we're starting from Mishnah Aleph. Heichelu oilim imaylas ulam. Two kaihanim started going up the steps in the ulam, which is the chamber right outside the heichal, to go into the heichal. These two kaihanim, one of them was going to be offering the ketairis, and one of them was holding the coals that would go on that mizbeach inside the mizbeach haprimi, inside the heichal. Now, before these two kahanim would go in, two other kahanim would go in before them. What were they doing? They were going to finish cleaning out the mizbeach haprimi and going to finish cleaning out the menorah. So the one kohen who went to finish cleaning out the mizbeach haprimi, he took the teni, the basket that was there with the ashes from the mizbeach, and he bowed down and he left. Now the second kohen to enter was there to finish cleaning out the menorah. He went in and he found two lamps of the menorah still burning. Which two lamps? 5 of them are cleaned out already. So the menorah faced from east to west. So when the kohen would walk in, one would be closest to him, and then there would be 7 lamps, and the furthest one would be closest to the Kodesh Kodashim. So the 5 of them closest to the Kodesh Kodashim were already cleaned out. The 2 closest when you walk in, the 2 eastern lamps, were still needed to be cleaned. So if he went in, he found those 2 lit, Mizdashin Es HaMizrachi, the one closest to him, the most eastern lamp, the first one you walk in, he would take the wick out and the oil out, and he would clean out that lamp. And then he would leave the second one, the second most eastern lamp, which is the western of the 2 that are remaining. He would leave that one lit. In the evening, when they were going to light the menorah again, that second lamp would stay burning, and they would light the menorah that night from that fire. Now, this was a special miracle that only happened in certain times of the Beis HaMikdash, that the menorah would burn 24. One lamp of the menorah would burn for 24 hours. So they would light it one evening. 5 of them would be cleaned out, then the last one would be cleaned out, and then they'd leave the last one lit, and the next night they would light from that candle again. It was a miracle that happened in certain times, like in the time of Shimon HaTzadik, one of my father's names. But then there were other times, Mitzay Shekava, that the kohen would come in and the lights were out, they were extinguished. So what he would do, he would clean out those 2 lamps, the last 2 that weren't cleaned out, the 2 eastern lamps, the ones closest when you walk in, the first 2. And that night, when they needed to light the menorah, they would get the fire from the mizbeach outside the mizbeach ha'elah. Nato asakuz mimayla shniya. Now, this kohen cleaning out the menorah would take the jug from the second step. There were 3 steps leading up to the menorah. He would take the jug from the second step, which had in it the wicks and the oil, which they cleaned out from the menorah. Vishtachva, and he would bow down. V'yatza, and he would leave the heichal and wait outside. Mishnah Beis. Misha zacha b'machta. So now the next kohen enters. He is holding the coals. They're going to go on top of the mizbeach to offer the ketairis in the heichal mizbeach haprimi, and he heaps the coals onto the mizbeach. He flattens them out with the bottom of the shovel, and then he bows down and he leaves the heichal. Okay, Mishnah Gimel. Misha zacha b'ketairis. Now the kohen who won the lottery and was chosen to bring the ketairis that day, so he would take the spoon out of the ladle. The ketairis was mainly in the spoon heaped up, but it was also a ladle underneath to catch anything that fell out. So the one that brought the kohen that brought the ketairis actually brought one other kohen with him. He got to choose who it was. It wasn't like a lottery like the other people that were chosen. It was either someone he loved, ayavai, or kroivai, or a relative of his. and he would pass the ladle, the lower spoon, the lower container that was protecting the keteris that it shouldn't fall, he would pass it to this other kayin. Nispazer mimenu l'seichai neisleim b'chafnav, and if any of the keteris fell out of the spoon that he was holding, that fell out of the cup, he would refill it into the cupped hands of the kayin that's going to offer the keteris. Umalamdim oisai, and they would teach the guy. The person would only bring keteris one time, so he never did it before. So they would teach him, have a zahir shemav taschel lefanacha shalai tikava. So you should always, when you bring the keteris, don't start pouring it from close to you and go further away, because you could burn yourself from the coals that are on the mizbeach. Start from further away and then bring it back close to you. Hischol meraded v'yaitzeh. So he started arranging the keteris, and then there's two different opinions. Either it was the first guy and he left the heichal, or it was the person who was actually who would actually bring the keteris and he would just change positions. Lo yahaya maktir ad shamamuna aimer lo haktir, and he wouldn't offer and burn the keteris, the incense, until they announced, the mamuna would tell him, haktir, it's time to offer the incense, time to give the keteris. Different reasons given why he needed to be instructed, either because no one was allowed to be inside the heichal, which is, no one was allowed to be inside the heichal when he offered keteris. So to make sure that everybody is outside, there would be someone that would announce, haktir means the door's closed, everyone's out, you could offer the keteris now. Another opinion is also just so a person shouldn't be doing it on his own right, that I'm offering keteris, so he needed to be commanded to do it. Im haya kayin gadol, if it was the kayin gadol bringing the keteris that day, hamamuna aimer ishi kayin gadol hakter, the person appointed to announce when it's time to bring the keteris, he wouldn't just say hakter, he would actually give a more honorable announcement. He would say, my master kayin gadol, it's time to offer keteris. Parshua the people moved away, v'hikter, and the kayin would offer the keteris, v'ishtachava, and then that kayin would bow down, v'yatza, and he would leave the heichal. So that is the end of Parak Vav, and now we start Parak Zayin of Maseches Tamid. So all the Kohanim would come in and bow down at this point. So when the Kohen Gadol would enter to bow down, 3 Kohanim would help him out. One Kohen would be on his right side, one on his left side, and one Kohen would hold the two precious stones that were on his shoulders from attached to the choshen. The cave and sheshama mamuna kol ragov shon Kohen Gadol shehu yotze. After the Kohen Gadol would bow down, he would now leave the heichal. He would walk out backwards out of respect. So there was someone in charge. He would hear the Kohen Gadol coming towards the door, because the bells on the bottom of the me'il would be making noise. And he would higbia lai esa pareches. He would pick up the pareches to make sure that Kohen Gadol could walk out easily. And then minichnas v'ishtacha v'yatza, this one who picked up the pareches would go in and bow down. V'nichsu acha v'kana v'ishtacha v'yatzu. And after that, all the Kohanim would go into the heichal and bow down at this point. Okay, Mishnah Beis, Perek Zayin. They would come and stand on the stairs of the ulam. So now we're going to start describing the process of Birchas Koyanim in the Beis Hamikdash. And Birchas Koyanim actually happened a little later on in the actual process. It happened after they burnt the limbs from the Tamid, which is going to be described soon. But since we're already discussing the Kohanim leaving the heichal, it says where those Kohanim stood and the rest of them stood and how they did Birchas Koyanim. So all the Kohanim lined up on the stairs of the ulam, on the chamber right outside the heichal. Amdu harishaynim lidarim achayim akayanim v'chamisha kelim biyadam. So the 5 Kohanim who just went in, that we just discussed, the one with the keteris, the one and his friend, and the one with the coals, and the one that cleaned the menorah, and the one that cleaned the mizbeach hapnimi, these 5 were all the way to the south, which if you're looking at the heichal would be all the way to the left. And each of them still had a vessel in their hands. Ateni biad echad. One of them is holding the basket with the ashes from the Mizbeach that we discussed. One of them is holding the wicks and the oil from the menorah that was clean. And the shovel that were holding the coals originally are in someone else's hand. And the ladles in someone's hand that was protecting the outside of the keteris. And then, the bazik is the spoon, and then the kaf and the kasuya is the ladle and the cover, which was being held by that fifth kain. Just imagine this. They gave Berchas Kainim in front of the Beis HaMikdash, all the Kaihanim together, something very special about the Berchas Kainim in the Beis HaMikdash. It was one long bracha. From Yivarecha, the first word, till Shalom, there was no break in between. It was one long bracha, like it says here in the Mishnah. Ella Shemadina Ayrim Eisa Shalish Brachas, Ova Mikdash Bracha Achas. In the Medina, in the country, outside of the Beis HaMikdash, Berchas Kainim is made into 3 separate brachas, like we know it. But in the Beis HaMikdash, it was one bracha. But Mikdash Haya Ayrim Es Hashem Kichsavai. In the Beis HaMikdash, when they would do Berchas Kainim, they would say and pronounce Hashem's name as it is written. Uva Medina, but outside of the Beis HaMikdash, Bechinuyai, we pronounce it differently, as we know. But Medina Kainim Neisans Kapehem. Yedeim Keneged Kiyas Faisehem. Outside of the Beis HaMikdash, when Berchas Kainim is done, the Kaihanim during Berchas Kainim lift up their hands until their shoulders. Or a Mikdash al Gabi Rasheim, but in the Beis HaMikdash, they would actually raise their hands above their heads, which is a very high spiritual level of ruchnius. Besides for the Kayin Gadol, he would not raise his hands higher than the tzitz. He had the special tzitz with Hashem's name on his forehead, and he wouldn't raise his hands higher than that. So all the Kahanim would have their hands over their heads, but the Kayin Gadol would have his hands under his head. Rabbi Yehuda holds differently. He says, even the Kayin Gadol would raise his hands higher than his head, higher than the tzitz, and he has a proof from a pasuk, Shenemar, Vayisa Aaron es yadav ela'am vayivarchim. Aaron raised his hands towards the people, and he blessed them, he benched them, and this shows that even the Kayin Gadol, according to Rabbi Yehuda, would raise his hands above his head. Mishnah Gimel. Bizman Kayin Gadol writes Lahaktir. So now we're going to discuss the burning of the rest of the limbs of the Tamid. So if the Kayin Gadol wished, he could take over anyone's job and decide that he wants to be the one to burn the limbs, and that's the way we're going to describe it here. So if the Kayin Gadol wanted to be the one to burn the limbs of the Tamid on his Mizbeach, he would go up the ramp to the Mizbeach, the Oila, outside of the Hichal, where the Karbanos were burnt, and he had a skan, a deputy, a helper on his right side. He would get to halfway up the ramp. Achas haskan b'mina v'helo. The skan, the helper, the deputy, would help him up the rest of the way up the ramp. Hoishit loy harishan hareish v'regel. The first kayin holding the foot and the head would hand it to the Kayin Gadol. Some v'samach aleim uzrakan. He would do smicha. He would push his hands down onto these limbs, the head and the foot, and he would throw them to be burnt on his back. And it's very interesting that smicha is done here, because smicha was generally done on whole animals and live animals, but here it's done just on a living animal and obviously not alive anymore. So it's a very unique smicha that the Kayin Gadol would do before he would throw these limbs onto the mizbeach to be burnt. The second Kayin would pass to the first Kayin the 2 front legs, or the 2 hands of the animal. They would give it. He would then the first one would hand it to the Kayin Gadol, and he would do the same smicha, put his hands down on them, and throw it onto the mizbeach. This second Kayin was holding these shtei yadayim, the 2 front legs, would then slip out and leave the area. And this is how they would do it for all the limbs. And every one of them, the Kayin Gadol would do smicha on them, put his hands on them, and then throw it onto the mizbeach. And if the Kayin Gadol wanted, he could just do the smicha, and someone else could do the throwing onto the mizbeach. The next step is pouring the wine on the mizbeach. Now the Kayin Gadol needs to get to the southwestern corner of his back. So he's standing in front of his back in front of him. Southwestern corner is right to his left. He's on the south side, and he needs to go right to the left. How would he get there? Special way how he would get there. And where would he start? So he would go all the way around the Mizbeach. First, he would go to the southeast. He would make a right, get to the top of the ramp, make a right, go to the southeastern corner of the Mizbeach, and then he would head Mizrachas Finest to the northeastern corner, go up the eastern side to the northeastern corner. It's Finest Maravis. He would then cross the Mizbeach and go to the northwestern corner, and then Maravis Deremis end up finally, after going all the way around, to the southwestern corner of the Mizbeach, where the Nesachim, where the wine was poured. Nasan la yayin lenasich. He was handed the wine to be poured in that spot. And interesting to note that the Kayan who brought up the wine would not make a circle around the Mizbeach because they didn't want the wine to be damaged by any of the smoke in the Mizbeach. He would actually just go up the ramp and make a left to that southwestern corner. Haskan Eiman ala Keren Rasadarim Biyadeh. And there was a skan, there was a deputy who would stand on the horn of that horn of the corner of the Mizbeach where the wine was going to be poured, and he had flags in his hand. Just picture this. And then there were two kaihanim standing on a table, chalavim. Which table? The table of the fast. There was a silver table and a marble table. The marble table is where some of the karbanis would be cut up, and it was called the table of the fats. They had two trumpets of silver in their hands. So two kaihanim standing on a table with trumpets in their hand. It sounds like 770. Taku veheru v'taku. They would do a tekiah, and then a trua, and then a tekiah in these trumpets. Bo v'amdu eitzel ben Arza. And then they would go stand next to Ben Arza. Who's Ben Arza? Ben Arza was the first one in the Beis HaMikdash to play the cymbal. So after that, anyone who would play the cymbal would be called Ben Arza. So these two kaihanim with their silver trumpets would go stand next to Ben Arza, the cymbal player. One on his right, one on his left. Shachal lenasech. The Kohen Gadol bent down to pour the wine. The skan on the horn of the Mizbeach would wave the flag. The Hikish Ben Arza Batzaltzal, and Ben Arza would start playing the cymbals. V'dibru halavim b'shir, and the Levim would start singing their song. And interesting, it doesn't say they would sing their song, it says they would say their song, just like we say Zaga Niggin. We don't say sing a niggin. So the flags would be waved, the cymbal would start to be played, and the beautiful songs of the Levium would begin as the Kohen Gadol is pouring this wine on the Mizbeach, which was part of the finale of the daily Tamid. Higiu leperek, when they would reach the end of the perek of the Levium song, taku, they would blow the shofar again, v'yishtachu and the whole nation would bow down. I'll call perek tekiah, every single perek that they finished in the Tilm of the day, they would blow a tekiah. I'll call tekiah, ishtachavaya, and at the end of every tekiah, the nation would bow down. And it says that every perek of Tehillim, it's the same Shir Shoyim that we say now every single day. The songs they would sing was split up into three. So at the end, each one of those three parts was a perek where they would blow the shofar and everyone would bow down. And Zehu, this concludes and is Seder HaTamid La'avodas Beis Elokeinu, the order of the Tamid every single day in Beis Elokeinu, in the Beis HaMikdash. And the Mishnah says, Yehi Ratzon, it should be Hashem's will, the Eibishter's will, She'yabana b'mheira v'yameinu, that we should see this with our own eyes today. We should see this whole process happening speedily. It should be rebuilt very, very soon. Okay, we're up to Mishnah Dalid in Perek Zayin, which discusses the songs that the Levium sang. Hashir Shaya Levium Armin Beis HaMikdash. So on the first day of the week, on Sunday, they would sing the capital that starts with Hashem Haratzom Leah Teil V'Yeshuva. V'Sheinu Ayrim Gadol Hashem Elul Ma'od Be'er Lekenu Harkachay. V'Shlishu Ayrim Elikim Nitza Ba'adis Kel Be'kerev Elikim Yishbait. ברביעי הוא היו איימים אל נקמת השם ונקמת סבייה וגמר. בחמישי היו איימים הרנינו לאליקים וזינו אבי אלוקי יעקב. בשישי איימים השם אלוקי זלבש וגמר. בשבס היו איימים מזמר שלהם בשבס. So these are the 7 kapitlach that we say for the 7 days a week of Shir Shayim. And this just about concludes the Masechta, and I'm going to stop here to pass it over to finish the Masechta by the live Siyum. Thank you so much. L'chaim v'levracha. Mashiach now.